Hey guys, this is Leigh with Still Raven Farms. Today we are going to talk about planting my garden with me and what you can do if you're kind of in that weird spot where it's December, January, maybe you can't start seeds yet. So today I'm talking about specifically my garden and what we're putting into it. I have compiled all of my seeds and all my lists and all my things. I've pulled out my garden journal for 2023 and really looked into it and deciding what to actually plant, where, how, what was planted last year, all of those things. And I kind of wanted to walk you guys through my step by step of how I actually plan my gardens. I feel like there's a lot of new homesteaders out there that are just kind of sitting there going, I don't really know what to do. Like I know how to start a seed. I know how to grow that seed. I know how to put that seed in the ground, but I don't really know where to put it in the ground. Or excuse me, my fancy Italian soda is trying to revisit. So the big deals that we run into, especially as new homesteaders, is nobody tells us how to plan a garden, right? And I'm going to tell you that your garden is going to look vastly different from mine, and that is perfectly okay. We grow on average 300 types of tomato plants. Oh, excuse me, let me back that up. We grow 300 tomato plants. You may not have that kind of space. You may hate tomatoes. You may hate red sauce. You may despise hot sauce or, ketchup, barbecue sauce. You may not like those things, and therefore you are not going to need 300 tomato plants. And that's okay. That's why I'm saying I'm going to walk you guys through how I plan my garden, and then you can kind of look at what I do and pull whatever you like from what I do into your garden. And that is the beautiful thing about homesteading, is you get to look at all these people and what they're doing and make the decision on whether that is something that you want to do or if it's something that you're not really interested in. And that's okay. That's great. So to start off with, we're going to start with the kitchen garden because that is my favorite. I have 14 4x8 beds in my kitchen garden. And right now, I went a touch overboard. Sorry, I'm trying to get my notes. So if you hear rustling paper, that's what that is. And pens moving all around the thing. So anyways, so I consulted with my garden plan from last year as well as my garden journal from last year. And one of the things that I noticed was that we had a lot of success with the trellising that we did. We took 2 cattle panels and we draped them over from one bed into the next one, creating an arch, right? And then on some beds we just had a cattle panel sticking out of the ground. So we found that plants that grow big and tall, the vining plants, do really well on the cattle panel arches, right? They do fantastic. The problem that we ran into was the heavier the fruit on that plant, and the bigger the gaps within the trellis, the cattle panel, the more likely that something was going to fall through. And so I have old work t-shirts that they're old. They're ridiculous. They've got holes in the armpit, they're gross. And so what I did is I cut them up and I used them as slings, and that helped quite a bit. But with that, we also ran into some problems where, the fruit, whatever it was outgrowing the t-shirt sling that we were making. So we had to kind of figure out how we were going to manage getting these fruit to sit on top of the panel without it falling through the panel. So one of the things that we're going to do this year is we're going to run netting, just some, screen netting that's on your window screens. We're going to run those over the top of the cattle panels to try to help, give some tension without letting things fall through, because I'm not going out and buying brand new cattle panel that's got smaller holes. We're not doing that. That the cattle panel are expensive. So the other thing that was a little bit of a struggle when planning the kitchen garden is I went a little overboard, shocker, when I planted my garlic and onions. I pretty much, every bed that had enough space got a lot of garlic and onion planted in them, which means that those beds are kind of screwed for summer planting ish. So I have to be very careful with what I plant within these beds to kind of make sure that, you know, the garlic and the onion don't get squeezed out, or, you know, the root systems, you know, of the plant impede the growth of the garlic and the onion, right? So I got to kind of play with that a little bit. And if you're in that situation with me, welcome to the club. I always overplant and end up having to figure things out. So bed 1 has a cattle panel going from bed 1 to bed 2. So it's got that arch panel. And in the main part of the bed, so the way that I have my arches set up is the cattle panel is situated approximately 8 inches from the edge of the bed, not the top rail that goes around the top of the bed, just 8 inches from the side wall of the bed. So that actually gives me this really great space that I can plant within, and the whatever I've planted will go up and over the cattle panel. So each cattle panel is about 42 inches ish, you know, 48, you know, somewhere in there. They're a bunch of different sizes. So the first thing that's going in bed 1, it's already got the garlic and the onions in it, so we're not planting within that other 3-foot space right now. So what's going to end up on the cattle panel is going to be melons. Now, I plant 2 melons per cattle panel. So that particular bed 1 is going to have 4 melons on it, on that side of the cattle panel. And then in bed 2, because I planted tomatoes in bed 1, I'm not going to plant tomatoes in bed 2 again. So also, I try really hard to only plant cherry tomatoes in my kitchen garden. I'll plant a couple in the big garden, but really my kitchen garden is my enjoyment. It's where I go sit and hang out, you know, in the summer, in the spring, in the fall. And so because that's where I go hang out, that's where there's a lot of snacky type food. So sweet peppers, cherry tomatoes. I've got a raspberry bush. I've got different kind of snacky foods in there. So on bed 2, I've got the cattle panel from bed 1 goes into bed 2, and that has about an 8-inch gap between the panel itself and the wall of the bed. And then I have another cattle panel going from bed 2 to bed 3. So that leaves me this like 2-foot stretch in between the 2 cattle panels. And that is amazing, because what I get to do is I get to plant whatever I want in there. So on the panel itself, it's going to have cherry tomatoes. There's going to be 3 cherry tomato plants, and then 1 or 2 regular tomato plants. I haven't decided yet, you know, exactly which ones are going to go in there. In that middle strip, I'm going to plant beans, you know, bush beans. They don't require the trellising because there's not really any trellising in the middle, but they have the support of the plants that are in there. They have the support of the beans, and those are also going to be long beans, right? So those are going to be my dry beans for the year. Well, one of the beds of dry beans for the year, because it's very difficult. I'm 5'8". I have a very large, you know, long wingspan, but I can only get so far into, I don't have, you know, an 8-foot wingspan here. So I can only get so far into that area in between the 2 panels. So and we get really big Euro spiders. We get really big just general spiders. I'm not reaching into stuff. Okay. And so I have multiple beds that have these kind of big 2-3 foot space between the cattle panels that I can only get so far into. So usually what I'll do is I'll plant things that I don't have to touch, right? I don't want to go in there and plant zucchini that I have to go digging for the zucchini. because then I'll end up with a 18-foot long zucchini in a bed that I never found until it's way too late. The good thing is I'll have plenty of seeds, but I don't want that. I want to eat the zucchini. And then on the other side of that cattle pan, on the other side of the beans, on that next trellis, that arch trellis, will be small pumpkins. Now we grow New England pie pumpkins, and they are delicious. There's not a ton of seeds in them. They're mostly flesh and meat, and so they're really, really good. I'm not going to go through every single bed, but I am going to kind of give you an idea of how I planned it and why. Bed 3 is our lettuce bed. We always plant lettuce in there. It receives a lot of shade, so even in the middle of summer, we can usually get a pretty decent harvest before it bolts. Bed 4 and 5 are huge beds. They're the size that are going to go into our big garden. They're 2 foot tall. And that's what I mean by huge. They're still 4x8, but they are huge beds. Very tall. So we are going to plant peppers in that bed. And we're just going to kind of rest because the soil is still pretty deep pretty low in those beds. We're going to fill it most of the way, but we're going to place a, spare fencing that we have, and we're just going to kind of put it on top so that the peppers have something to kind of grab onto without, having to stake or trellis them, because they don't need it, but they do need some support. So we're putting like 32 peppers in there. They're all going to be bell peppers. I'm not going to sit there and try to figure out what's a sweet pepper and what's a bell pepper in a bed. Like, that's how you end up with, a mouthful of fire. And so we're not doing that. So bed 4 is going to have a bunch of peppers in it. Bed 5 or bell peppers, and bed 5 is going to have a bunch of hot peppers. Easy done. Bed 6 is going to be my herb bed. It's got a trellis on it, so I'm actually going to do a loofah, 1 or 2 loofah plants on there. I've always wanted to try growing loofah. Every time I try to grow loofah, it never works because some creature eats it. Thank you, chickens. Bed 7 also has that same kind of, 2-3 foot gap in between the 2 beds, or between the 2 trellises. So that is going to get leeks. And I have in parentheses a lot. What I do, I love leeks. I'd never heard of leeks until I started homesteading, and I was like, well, what is it? And it's a mix between a kind of a garlic and an onion, and it's really good. And I was like, all right, fine, screw it, I'll try it. I bought a bunch and I fell in love, and they are the best. Put them in soups. Oh my God. And what we do is we dehydrate them. So we eat a lot of them fresh as they come up. But once they're getting too big, or they're kind of done with their life, I will harvest all of them, and I will spend hours. And I have a huge dehydrator. It was a homemade dehydrator that we found at Habitat for Humanity. And it's got like 18 trays. It's like 3 foot tall. It's huge. And so I fill those up with, whatever we need to dehydrate at that time. And leeks do very well dehydrated. You throw them in your soup during the winter, and oh God, they're delicious. Anyways, tomatoes and beans are really our big staples. We grow a ton of them. We love fresh green beans. Peas, we're okay with peas. Like we've grown them, although not enough for a meal. We tend to snack on them in the garden, which is again why they're in the kitchen garden. And then I've got squash and zucchini in bed 8. Bed 10 has a ton of sunflowers in them. We don't have a lot of animals, but we do have a lot of animals. We have a lot of chickens. And so what we do is we grow tons of sunflowers. 1, they're beautiful, right? Like, they're gorgeous. But 2, it provides a lot of nutrition to the soil. It helps pull out any possible toxins that are in there. The way that we garden, there are no toxins in there, but they're beautiful, and why not grow some? So bed 10 is pretty much winter squash. I have the way I'm doing it this year is I'm in that space between the arch and the wall, the arch and the wall of the bed is going to have 8 winter squash. And then I'm going to turn around, and on the other side, I'm going to plant winter squash within the bed, but I'm going to allow it to trellis over the panel, right? So I'm going to give pretty much this whole bed to winter squash growing, vining around and then up on the trellis. And then I'm also going to give it to the sunflowers. There is going to be some potential for disaster here, right? Because if the winter squash grabs onto that sunflower, it's probably not going to go well. But I'm out there every day checking on my garden. And so I've hope it's a hope that I can find it before it becomes a problem. And I'll probably miss some, and that's okay. Like, it's not the end of the world if the sunflowers don't grow. It's okay. And then bed 9, I've got more melon, I've got some more winter squash, and then I got okra and peppers going in that as well. Bed 14 is going to be pretty stuff, as well as ground cherries and some dill. We had a dill plant going, and here where we live, it does very well. And I'm not real sure what happened to it. I probably harvested a little bit too much too quick, and it died. I'm not really sure how you kill dill, but I did it. But that bed 14 is really just pretty stuff. It's just, sunflowers, cosmo, echinacea, that kind of stuff, just pretty things. And then it's the same with bed 13. It's all my cut flowers that I want to grow for the year. Again, bringing pollinators into your garden is never a bad thing. Bed 12 is 100% at this point asparagus. I'm buying, I think, 25 more crowns to put in that bed. But I also have a ton of seed that dropped into the bed. So I fully plan on that bed being completely wild for a while, which is great. I'm also going to dig up all the strawberries that were in that bed. They tell you that strawberries and asparagus go great together. They're great companions, and they are. But if you plan on eating any of those strawberries, I suggest very highly that you get them up off the ground. Strawberries do really well in containers. They do well in hanging baskets. They do well, in all those things. And I would recommend very highly that you do that, because you are going to end up with slugs. I didn't get a single strawberry, whether it was because of the slugs, the chickens, or the ducks. I didn't get any. So this year, that's what we're doing. We're going to get them out of the asparagus bed and get them into containers and put them up on the porch so that we actually have a fighting chance to have some strawberries. I also really recommend making sure that you grab a variety of strawberries that have runners. I am frugal-ish. Okay, I hate spending money on things that I don't have to, but I am totally willing to spend money on things that I really want or really need. And in my head, strawberries that have runners are free plants. I never, ever, ever have to replant strawberries if I can get those runners to plant and produce. Okay, so I always buy, I've bought strawberry seeds. I've tried various ways of trying to get them to grow, and I cannot get them started. But I have replanted strawberries for the last 2 years, and it's amazing. I don't have to buy strawberries anymore. Now I will, because who can turn down a strawberry? I can't turn down a strawberry. And then bed 11, I know I went all out of order on these. Bed 11 is my blueberry raspberry bed, and that's all that's in it. Well, and then I've got a rose plant in there because I needed a place to put this knockout. It was a $50 knockout rose that I got for like $4 because it was on clearance and it was half dead. So I picked that up, but I needed a place to put it, so I just threw it in the raspberry bed and said, it'll be all right. So that's the kitchen garden, and that was actually pretty quick. Now, what I'm gonna tell you, that has already been planned, right? That's pretty easy, pretty simple. Here's where the hard part comes in. I have, in my big garden, I have 16, well, excuse me, I don't have them yet. They're coming. That's part of our facelift for this year. 2024, our big garden is getting a massive facelift. So we have, technically speaking, something like 15,000 square feet of garden space within the big garden. The problem is that between the chickens, the ducks, the pigs, and the goats, and the dogs, we couldn't use any of that. The weeds were coming up. We couldn't keep the weeds under control. We couldn't, it was a disaster. And so I decided, Jared wasn't super happy with me, but he'll be okay. I decided I wanted raised beds in the big garden, and there was a lot of reasons for it, but the biggest was I cared for the kitchen garden so much better because it was pretty. There were lines, there were beds, there were things, like there was this structure that I didn't realize that I needed until we installed the kitchen garden. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. This is great. And so we're copying that and putting that in the big garden. Now the big garden is going to have 2-foot tall beds, and they are going to be 4 foot wide by 20 feet long. And there's going to be 16 of them. Now, I am not really willing to plan out that particular space of the garden until all of the trees are down, all of the fencing is put up, all of the beds are starting to be built. Then I will start to really get into planning that garden space. But I wanted to give you the gist of how I actually plan my gardens. So because this, and I feel like a lot of people are kind of starting out from scratch, especially if you're, Plan My Garden with Me is the title of this podcast. You may not have a garden to plan yet. You may still be learning and researching, and that's great. So I figured we'll kind of go through this together. The beds are, 1 through 16. They are, again, 4 foot by 20 foot, 20 foot long. That is a ton of space. Now, because of how I garden and because the soil that is going into those beds is good, healthy soil that's not been, used by past plantings or anything like that, I have a blank slate. I can do whatever I want to. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to plant, in the first 4 beds are going to be the tomato beds. And at 20 feet long, I can get 30, I probably get 50 comfortably. I could put 50 tomatoes in that bed. Now, that's not what I'm going to do, but I could do that. What I'm planning on doing is taking a 16-foot cattle panel and installing that in the middle of the bed. So in the middle of that 4-foot stretch. And then I plan on planting 1 tomato kind of catty corner from each other, kind of doing like a chevron pattern up and down. 1 tomato plant every foot. So on, one panel, on one side of the panel, it'll be, that'll be tomato plant number 1. And then 6 inches over on the other side of the cattle panel will be tomato plant 2. And then 6 inches over on the next cattle panel will be 3. And because the soil is so fresh, the soil has so much nutrients in it because we are putting a ton of compost in there, it should be fine. If they start to struggle, I can always pull one out. Like it's not a super big deal. And then also because these beds are, 2 foot tall, and I have a cattle panel that'll be probably 18 inches to 2 feet off the ground, they have a ton of space to go up. And so I feel like it'll probably be fine. I've planted tomato plants so much closer together without realizing it, and they've done fine. They don't do as well, but they do fine. So I'm hoping with a little bit more space, it'll be okay. And then I'm also planning on planting on the edges of the tomato beds, things like marigold, basil, thyme, oregano, kind of an Italian bed, if you will. And then the following year, that's when I'll actually probably plant a ton of garlic in that space too. That's bed 1 through 4. Mostly are going to be tomatoes. There'll probably be a pepper or 2 in there. Nothing crazy. It's probably just going to be dedicated to tomatoes and, various herbs that'll fit within that space. Another thing that I'm probably going to do is plant zucchini along, not a lot, just a couple of zucchinis, along the edges, as close to the edge of the bed as possible so that they can go up and over the bed, and kind of see what that does. There's a potential that they could die. There's a huge potential that they will die because we have the squash bugs down here really bad. Beds, let's see, that's beds 1 through 4. Beds 5, 6, 7, 8. Those beds are probably going to, because it's in a shadier spot in the garden, those beds are probably going to be mostly beans, squash, and a couple peppers thrown in there. We're also going to make sure that we've got melons, and whatever that looks like, making sure that we've got tons and tons and tons of snacky things because we absolutely love to snack. And then so that, then we'll kind of keep going down. Now, this is where you come in. Okay. This is where I'm gonna like I told you, I'm not really big into planting a garden that hasn't even had the first tree taken down in it yet. Now we have grown in this garden before. This is the garden that we first moved in. This was the garden that we created, and it has done very well for us. It's in a great spot. There's plenty of sun. The water runs downhill, so it hits the top of the garden, and it kind of rolls downhill. So when we get rain, there's a lot of water that's actually used effectively. The big thing that we are walking into the 2024 season, which is the season that we're going into, is this is all experimentation. We are making sure that we are planting things that we know that we'll eat, right? We eat it again, 300 tomato plants. We eat a ton of tomatoes. I actually hate tomatoes. The only tomato that I will eat raw is a sweet 100. Other than that, hate them. Can't friggin' stand raw tomatoes, but I do love red sauce. I love pasta, pasta sauce, ketchup, barbecue, all of those things that you make with tomatoes. I love it. And so we grow a ton because every year I put up about 1,000 pounds of tomatoes. So it's imperative that we have enough plants to produce 1,000 pounds of tomatoes. And I would rather have too much than not enough. So we are looking to plant. We've got black krim. Now that I'm thinking about it, I can't. We've got a bunch of brandy wines. We've got a bunch of beefsteaks. I've actually got a couple of the current tomatoes are itty bitty teeny tiny. They're smaller than a blueberry. Like that. I got a bunch of those. Just to see what we like. Right? Because I am all about experimentation. I want to find what I like. Now, if you don't like tomatoes, you don't like red sauce, you don't like any of that stuff, please do not plant 300 tomato plants. Okay? It's pointless. There's literally no point in you doing that. But also be advised that if you absolutely love cucumbers, it's probably not a great idea to plant 15 cucumber plants because you'll drown in cucumbers, especially if you don't have any farm animals to eat them. Beans is another big one. Like we are probably going to plant several hundred feet of beans because we eat a ton of beans, whether it's green beans from, fresh from the garden, we store them, dried beans, for, soups and that. We eat a ton of beans. And so making sure that we have enough is really, really important. Same thing with squash. We eat a ton of squash in the winter. I don't buy winter squash because I can grow winter squash. But occasionally they'll run a sale on it and I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. And so I pick up a bunch. But if you don't eat it, if you don't eat something and you have a limited garden space, please do not. Just because you have a garden doesn't mean you need to grow tomatoes if you don't like tomatoes. Just because you have the space does not mean that you need to plant cucumbers if you cannot stand cucumbers. Okay? Figure out the foods that you like. And what I do is when I first started getting into gardening, I sat down and I said, okay, what do we eat? What do I buy at the store? And that first list was very small. We're talking, I don't really eat squash and we don't really eat this and we don't really eat that. And like my garden was teeny tiny because there just wasn't any food that we really understood that we ate. Right. And so the second year in my garden, I was like, all right, let's grow some tomatoes. Let's grow some different varieties of tomatoes. And the third year, fourth year, fifth year, we grew more stuff. Now, a lot of these gardens I would plant and then we would move and then I didn't get to eat them. Right. My husband was in the military. We moved. We only moved twice for the military, but we have moved a lot since being married. So for us, make sure that whatever it is that you're planting, you actually enjoy it. I will usually, like at this point in my gardening career, for whatever that is worth, we are tomato green bean, and squash heavy. That's a lot of what we grow. We probably grow 200 or 200 pepper plants, and that's kind of mixed, mostly sweet peppers and then a couple of hot peppers. I've got a I've got a ghost pepper that I grow every year to make sure that we deter digging dogs, because my dogs are stubborn. A typical cayenne pepper sprinkled in the ground doesn't work. We have to resort to pretty ridiculous measures to keep them from. So let's say that you plan on having a similar garden to me, right? My garden looks something like this: 300 tomato plants in various varieties. Then we have 200 pepper plants in various varieties. We are going to plant probably a grand total spaced out over the summer. Probably about 20 melon and cucumber plants. So 20 melons, 20 cucumbers. That's, with the melons, that's watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, so on. And then after that, we plant probably 20, 25 pounds of potatoes, and then probably about 30 or 40 sweet potato slips. I plant three 50-foot rows of corn, and that is split between popcorn, cracked corn, and sweet corn. And then zucchini, squash, your summer squashes, and then your winter squashes, and then a bunch of potatoes. Wow. A bunch of pumpkins. And then, like I said, we've got some random stuff. We probably grow, I would say about 2 to 3 pounds of various beans. Not all of them germinate. Not all of them get to size because the chickens or the goats or whatever, but usually about 2 to 3 pounds of dried beans get planted. And then whatever else I decide that I like or I find at the store and I'm like, I want to plant that. And so I do. And that's my experimentation, right? Because I know that I like Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes, but I could like Sunrise cherry tomatoes. And so I buy them and I plant them. And if I don't like them, Jared does. And if he doesn't like them, the dogs do, or the goats do, or the chickens. And we have ways to use those plants if, for some reason we don't like them. So when you're planting your garden, I want you to first start your list. Figure out the foods that you eat, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with cooking from scratch, but really just kind of pay attention. And I'm going to do a podcast, probably the next one, of preserving food so that you can kind of start getting an idea, because I work backwards. I work from what do we consume, and I break that all the way down to what are the ingredients, right? And so then I make the determination of how much of something I'm going to plant, right? So one of the things, to give you an example, is tacos. Jared friggin' loves tacos. And if it is not from a taco place, like a taco restaurant, and he's very snobby about his taco restaurants, he will only willingly eat my tacos. And that sounds very dirty, but it is what it is. That being said, here are the ingredients that go into my tacos: rice, ground beef, ground sausage, onions, garlic, peppers, cumin, beef bouillon, and cilantro. I'm trying to think right off the top of my head. That's about it. Obviously there's, different seasonings and stuff like that, but that's usually it. So that tells me that I cannot grow rice where I'm at. That's not happening. Not enough. It's not worth it to grow the amount that I need every year. So I'm not growing rice, but I am going to grow peppers. Now, we usually are going to use something like cayennes, jalapenos, and bell peppers are usually what goes in it. So I need to grow those three, minimum, those three. Then I need to grow garlic, onion, cilantro, and figure out a way to store those things, right? And same thing with the peppers. And that is how, and then I source my ground beef locally. I have a farm down the road that we buy a whole cow from. And we have a guy that I work with that we get pigs from him. So there's my sausage and my ground beef. Tortillas, if we make corn tortillas, we can literally grind our own corn. We have the ability. We have, again, popcorn, cracked corn, sweet corn. We've got corn. And so then once I have those ingredients listed out and then what I can actually grow, then I turn around and say, okay, I can grow this, I can grow this, I can grow this. How often do we eat tacos? Well, we eat tacos about twice a month. So that means that I need to grow enough to support that, or I'm going to have to buy it from the store, right? That then comes into storage. Well, you cannot store peppers without doing something to them, usually. And so what I do is I dehydrate my peppers. I'm working on letting Jared, getting Jared to let me get a freeze dryer. That's a high ticket item that we're just not there yet. So I dehydrate them or I freeze them. Usually try to dehydrate them because I like the texture of them dehydrated over frozen. Freezing tends to turn things mushy, and I'm not a big fan of mushy. So that means that if I use about a cup, now we homeschool and we take lunches and dinners to work. So when I make tacos, it's like your mom used to make spaghetti. Like that was your meal for the next, 5 business days. She made one pot. And that's kind of how I cook, especially with tacos. I cook a big pot tacos. The taco meat, the fillings, the rice, everything gets put into this pot. And then we dole out our, whatever we want onto nachos or tacos. And it's just the filling, right? And so that all being said, I know that if I'm using a cup of peppers, dehydrated peppers, I probably need 1.5 cups to 2 cups of fresh peppers. That means that I need to grow. That's about, depending on the size of the pepper, because if you're talking about a poblano that's huge versus a cayenne that's very thin, that's going to be different. But it's probably about 10 or 15 cayenne peppers for each meal, fresh. And so that means that I got to grow a bunch of peppers. Now I also grow poblano, I grow the habanero, I grow a lot of different peppers because I make a mix. I make a hot pepper mix and I make a sweet pepper mix in my dehydrator. And that is what ends up, being put up for the season. Same thing with the garlic. The garlic is a sweet onion, versus a regular onion. Those get separated out. And usually, to be honest with you, I throw some goggles on and I'll just chop onions for like an hour and I'll dehydrate them because it makes it so much easier and storable. And I don't have to worry about things rotting. I do it. I pull everything but one garlic or 2 garlics. And that's usually what I plant for next year. And that's how I make the decisions on, how I'm going to plan my garden. Well, how much pepper, how many peppers did you use last year? So I look back at my journal and I say, okay, I grew and planted 50 hot peppers and we ran out. So I probably need to grow 10 more. And then, in 2024, I grew 75 hot peppers and I had too many. Well, too much is better than not enough. So I'm going to stick with that 75 hot pepper. And, that's kind of how I gauge it. So your first garden season, 3rd garden season, 5th garden season, it's a lot of playing. It's playing with those numbers and trying to figure out just how much food you eat. And you would be surprised to learn that you eat a lot of food. When you make the decision that you're going to grow 75% or 90% of your food, you have to understand that is a ton of food. Like I would go and I don't know, right? I don't know how much you eat. I don't know how much, the boys go through growth spurts and they eat me out of house and home. So this number changes, but I would say, realistically speaking, the average person eats, if I had to guess, and I don't, well, let's Google it real quick. How many veggies, how many vegetables does the average American eat? Okay, 1.5 cups, according to the USDA website. Overall, on a sample size, I don't like any of that. It's okay. So it's saying like 1.5 cups a day is what you should be doing, of vegetables. I would say you're probably looking at 1.5 cups times 365. That's 600 pounds. And if you're growing all of your own food, or 75 to 90% of your own food, that's probably closer to 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of food that you are consuming if you're only, you purchase your flour and your grain and stuff like that from the store, but you grow and eat everything off your land, fruit and vegetable wise. You're probably talking 2,000 pounds or so is what I would guess. I know for us it's a ton. Like I have 8 or 9 canning shelves in the basement that are full top to bottom with canned goods or empty jars, and every season the goal is to fill everything up. So I believe that. But I guess I didn't really talk a whole lot about planting my garden with me. I went over the kitchen garden, and like I said, I plan on doing a second podcast where I actually plan out the big garden with you guys, because that is hysterical and frustrating and annoying all in one go, because you're sitting there going, well, I got to grow 300 tomato plants. Well, I can put them over here. I can put them over here. I can put them over here. And next thing you know, you have tomatoes everywhere, and you don't want to do that, or you have peppers everywhere, and that's a little bit better, but you really don't want to do that either. And you kind of want to have groups of things all in one spot, and it's just it can get very frustrating. So you guys will get to watch, listen to that as I actually do it live in person. But like I said, my big thing that I wanted to impart on you guys today, as you're really starting to get into your garden plans and looking at gardens and, what am I going to plant? How am I going to plant it? What am I going to do? Really, in all honesty, and I know that you're not going to believe me, but planting a garden is literally as simple as putting a plant in the ground and watching it grow. If you take all the guesswork, if you take all the things out of it, all you are doing, and your first several gardens are going to be like this. You're going to take a plant and you're going to put it in the ground and you're going to go, it's not growing. I wonder why. Oh, it shot up 6 inches in 2 days. I wonder what happened. And it's observing. It's figuring out. It's what our ancestors did. It's what farmers should be doing if they're not already doing it, is paying attention. You put stuff in the ground and go, that didn't work. Or, that worked really well. And you make a note and you do it again next year. You don't do it again next year. And that's what we do. And that is like, I'm probably one of these days going to do a video where I actually show you my different gardening journals, because they are ridiculous. Right now I've got one on my desk that it's just a little, I think it's like a 4.5, 5-inch by 8-inch bullet journal. And it starts January 1, starts the garden season, right? And December 31st ends the garden season. And I literally will sit there and go through the journals and go, okay, this is what I want. This is what I didn't like. This is what we did. This is what didn't work. I go through everything and start taking notes. And then I start adjusting my plan for the next year. And that's all you do. So don't get hung up on the details. Don't, start looking at companion planting and, oh, well, I can't plant that with that, but that I can do with that. But if I plant that with that, just put the plant in the ground. And if it doesn't grow, make a note. And if it grows really well, make a note. And if you like the variety, make a note. And then next year, when you start your garden, to start 15 of those little buggers because they did great. And when 5 of those little shits die and you're like, well, what the hell happened? Write it down. So that next year, the year after that, the year after that, the year after that, you can look at your garden. I have 10 years of garden journals, guys. And they've all different houses, all different climates, different microclimates, different growing seasons, different plants, different times in my life. And that's okay. That's okay. But I think the very next episode after this, I think I'm going to do the importance of why you should have a garden journal, because this is literally the part of it. So I hope you guys have a good day. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring that bell if you're on YouTube. And I appreciate it. Y'all have a good day.